So over the years, we've come up with a system of having two different juries for the design awards. And the purpose of that is, for many years, we felt that a lot of the glass boxes and houses were real winners. They're tough to compete against. They're $1,000 a square foot or whatever they are. These beautiful jewels. And they were winning. And when was it, Karen? Like 4 or 5 years ago, we went to a dual jury system. And so that dual jury system, what it does is, one is a residential jury focused on residential awards. The other one is commercial, bigger religious buildings, and all of that is handled by the other jury, conceptual design. So what it does is it provides each project a chance to win and be considered, as opposed to just focusing on the beautiful glass boxes. So that was the purpose of the two jury system. We go to a different city each year. And the cities are based on, we take all of the submittals that are being submitted, we'll take those submittals, give them to the jury, and the jury looks at it, and that's the first cut. They make the first cut. And so that the cities are selected based on being close in scale, architectural scale, to where we are. So the work of our chapter members is reflected in the scale. So for instance, we've discovered, if you go to New York City or to something that's got a larger scale, or somewhere where it's smaller scale, then it becomes a problem. They cannot really relate to this, to what we submit. The other thing that we're very careful about is we've picked the jury members to represent a cross section of architects. So diversity, some of them will be AIA member, AIA, some will be FAIA, women, men. It's just sort of a good mixture. It's still design awards. Focus is on design. And then we've discovered that there's a pattern to making the actual submittal work in your favor. It's thinking of it as different screens that you have to pass through. So the first screen is everything is given to them, and they have to pick it, the initial cut, as we call it. So it's got to go through the initial cut. So it's got to be attractive, it's got to design. So, and you, J. Paul, you'll go through that. So just wanted to tell you the timeline. The submittal request for submittals is out. It's got all the details on it. If you submitted last year and didn't win, submit again. Each year's jury is going to be completely different. The way they think about it is going to be different. You don't have to change anything, just resubmit. And some of the bigger firms have 10 or 12 submittals they'll submit, so don't be afraid to submit. April 26th is the submittal deadline, and we can go through the actual parts of what needs to be submitted, but that's all described in detail. The only thing that I'm going to tell you, and what J. Paul is going to go in detail, is in the written portion of it, it's 250 words. There seems to be a drive towards consuming those 250 words. My personal feeling is, at some point when you make the final cut, people will actually read every portion. Initially though, they do not have the time to read a very densely written paragraph or a couple of paragraphs. It's really hard to read it. But I would, in some way, set up the design challenge, set up how you've solved it, and the impact. And clearly, brevity is the soul of wit there, in terms of getting really down to the essence of it, so that you're not distracted by it. And then second, would be the plans and the sections and so on and so forth. And sketches, people will love sketches. Don't load it up with sketches, but the actual process of it, I think, is valid. And then J. Paul will go through in much more detail examples.
So now let's go to the process. As Manoj mentioned, it's very important to remember that the jury is looking over these things as an electronic file. So if it looks terrible on your screen, it's going to look terrible on their screen. The old days of booklets that people thumb through at the table are no longer there. So it's very important. We've seen PDFs that are too large They're very hard to load. You'll see one today, I think, that just takes onerous amounts of time to load up. So be sure and get your file so it's just easy to read, like the web view of a PDF type of thing. They are going to shortlist and come to the jury session with their favorites. So we don't go through each of all the selections and say, oh, which ones do you like and don't like, other than they have already made their selections. Once in a while, someone says, can I look at this additional one because I was a little unsure and just want to get people's view on it. But otherwise, we're going to shortlist and we go straight in because we have so many to go through. The visual clarity, as you see on some of these, it depends on the type of project. Now, if it's an unbuilt work, you're going to need a lot more graphics, informational diagrams, and you'll see that in some of these. I tried to select the top tier of each of the categories, but I've also got a cautionary tale on one of them that I'll show you. But with that, as we're scrolling through these, we scroll through the shortlist, and they don't have time to read these again, like Manoj says. Only if there gets to be a large discussion, pros and cons, will we go in and start reading all the text in depth. But I will say, and I'll show you on some of these, it's also helpful though to label what you're showing. As architects, we love the graphical where it's just the photograph. It looks very wonderful. But sometimes, because this juror, this is the first time they've seen it, second time they've seen it, they're not familiar with the area, they're not familiar with, oh, that's right down the street, I remember that. And so just a little tagline with the photograph or something else will be very helpful. Anything else, Manoj? But this is a very interesting award because, or submittal system, because this is supposed to be by an associate, not a full member. It's part of a team effort. Sometimes it may be a standalone effort. There's a lot of confusion and it needs to be clarified. As you'll see on this proposal, there is a lot of confusion as to how much is done. And this is a very interesting thing. So this person in her long clarifications actually outlines how they are qualified to have this submittal. So this is a very good way to say that they were part of the team, then their design was selected, and then it was implemented. Obviously, there are unbuilt works, there are finished works. We, for instance, last year we only had one submittal, and the submittal had zero information on it. It was just a series of pictures, and you could not tell, was this an addition to an existing, was this in total? So it was very unclear. So whenever you're having one of your associates get involved in this process, make sure it's very clear so that everyone understands what scope of the project is involved. And you can see there was the graphics that were initial, and then the finished photographs. So this is one of the well done ones, and that's why we wanted to show that, because it has a lot of good types of graphics on it and the labeling going on.
We haven't seen enough submittals in this category. And sometimes when you see it, it seems to be clear that it's the firm submitting, and it's not really clear what the entrant actually did on that award. So it becomes harder for the jury. They might just throw it out. They might think that this isn't fair, really, this for associates. So we would encourage properly defined submittals, and a lot of them, so that we can have enough of a discussion.
Exactly.
The jury would have it.
So we'll entertain questions as we see these, because that'll just be easier than going back. Any thoughts, questions before we move on to the next type? Okay. Now, obviously, the projects are just as important as the submittal process. So, as we always mention, photography is paramount in all of these. We've seen some submittals where, and it's not just AI, but other awards, somebody went out and took instamatics of some of the, photos and just inserted them in, even though they may have had some professional stuff. They insert. It's better to just go ahead and have the stuff, because we have fellow professionals looking at this, and they're influenced obviously by good photography. But as Manoj mentioned, they have the description at the front, but that's it in this submittal. The rest are images of the project. Now, the one thing that I will say, and it's just having seen these in the past, I think it's always better if you just put a tagline, this is the view looking to the southwest, or this is the pool area. Only because this is the first time they see, and when this is a perfect example. This is a project that had 2 different buildings in it. This is an existing building, and then they built this behind, and so it was very unclear to the jurors exactly what was included in this project. We finally figured it out amongst all of us. It's kind of a work effort between us and the jurors. So even just that little tagline that clarifies seeing both the buildings in the project would help greatly.
So if you notice that the density of the writing was hard to really figure out. I don't think anyone really looked at that. When it made the final cut, then they started really reading it, and it was hard. Scope was unclear, but it's a design awards competition. So its design was strong enough to actually take it from being on the edge to being inside, and I think it did win an award.
Right. Yeah, so as Manoj speaks, I believe, after seeing these over and over again, even if you want to have a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs of written, I would do some bullets that can be easily viewed of your main points. And with these bullets, then you're able to immediately go to those. And so if there's just on the fence to accept it to the next level, those bullets can easily be focused on.
So it's usually challenges, solutions, impact. I've always thought that's pretty reasonable filters to put in bullets.
So you can see they chose to have full-page photographs, which is wonderful because we are projecting them. And so the bigger the photographs, the better we're going to be able to see all the details. And just another hint, both traditional and contemporary residential won awards. So this is not a question of, oh, they lean towards more traditional architecture or they lean more towards contemporary architecture. Both were award winners. I just didn't have time to show both in. And of course there's transitional architecture. So don't think that oh, they always go for the contemporary, or oh, they always go for the residential. When we interview them for the interview video, they're always saying they're looking for good quality architecture, not what is the style of architecture. And so you can see they've inserted quite a few photographs. As we all know, architects are graphic, and so the more the merrier as far as photographs go. And I will mention this right now. The problem we also see is there's a submittal, a PDF submittal that has a bunch of different photographs in it. Then we also have individual photographs that get placed that we use for different things. 9 times out of 10, it's very interesting. The really beautiful photographs that we see in the PDF somehow don't get translated into the photographs that you want us to use as your primary photographs. So we're kind of shocked because when we're putting this together, we go, oh, if we can only use the photograph we saw in this PDF, but you've provided almost a separate set of photographs sometimes. Very interesting. So just a heads up, no one in the public will ever see this, but they will see the 5 photographs that you select. So it behooves you to really think it through and go, we just love this photograph, we'll use it twice. It's not like, oh, I need those other 5 to explain even more of what's going on. Now, the interesting part of this also is that they've organized their interior photographs and then their exterior photographs, so they kind of walk through the space. You'll notice the plans are submitted later on in the proposal. They're not at the very front like we're doing a submittal for a project. They felt like the photographs were more important, then came the sections and the graphics that then began to explain what was going on. Then they added some photographs to help explain. But again, this is a beautiful photograph, but because of the multiplex of conditions here, it would have been great to have a description seeing both buildings and the pool area. Okay. Any questions on this submittal?
So there's no page limitation to the PDF, is that correct?
What does it say in the final?
File size.
I think the file size.
File size.
Yeah.
Used to be in the old days 6.
Yeah, I thought it was.
It's all gone to file size.
Okay. Is there
Show your
a
strongest.
realistic limit to how
I
many
think
pages?
you have to choose, because if you make, you have to select your strongest, whatever it is, image, plans, it's a composition.
I think if you have compelling information to share, it's worth including. If you don't have compelling information, it's just
Not just to
extra.
show every photo you
Yeah,
take for.
exactly.
Yeah. So to clarify, there is no page limit, but there is a file size limit. And so please be sure that you look at that in the instructions. Okay, now this was an interesting project because it's an old church and they turned it into an adaptive reuse. And so from a historical standpoint, you go, well, but wait a minute, where are all the old moldings? Where is all of the traditional original pieces? Again, in historical, we see two types: people who have restored it back to its original glory, and those who have taken the building that would otherwise have been torn down and utilized all the historical components they could, but then had some adaptive reuse. So that's this case, and this was one of the award winners. So as you can see, most of the historic renovation is on the exterior, and obviously that's a community-driven thing. But also, you'll see as we go into the interiors that there are elements, so you get to see peaks of the original interior as it applies to the new involvement. So as we can see here, you saw some of the old archways and some of the stained glass, the art glass that was reused in the project. So that was impressive to the jurors as well.
Notice the sections and the color and everything looks like a magazine layout, helps. Sometimes you've seen something where it's more like a CD or something. Someone in a hurry just put construction documents in. It's really hard to read for the jury.
And of course, this is very important, especially if you're doing a renovation, to show the existing and the new so that the jurors get a chance. And again, you may have a text that explains all this, but this easy graphics, as we all know, works well for them to scan through and see the differences. And obviously in the renovations, the before and after pictures are always telling. Again, you're trying to give as much information as you can to the jurors quickly so they can see, oh yes, things have dramatically changed.
I think this was especially nicely done because the explanations are very brief and they're the same page.
Okay, any questions on that?
While he's looking at this, I wanted to clarify one thing. Last year, for instance, we were on the jury for Colorado, and I started getting calls from one particular entry. I think it was social housing or something like that, where there was a mission to it. But they didn't win, the jury didn't select them. And so the question that came back was, is the jury against, they didn't even pick up on the fact that we had a constrained budget, this and that, and why didn't we win? the design awards, the mission is really about design. If you can describe whatever the other challenges and constraints are, do that. It may sway the jury, it may not. It's still a design awards competition. I just wanted to mention that.
Exactly.
Because that's all they're looking at. Jury
Yeah.
really doesn't have the time to go deeper into it and say, you know, after all, our own project, that was affordable housing. And so, you know, we didn't get to do windows, a lot of windows, so they just don't delve into it.
Right, yeah. And the way our jury is run, we have categories. And so instead of best of show, if you will, it's the best of each category. Some other chapters like to see it differently, but that's the way we've arranged it over the time.
So as you all know, there's awards, award of excellence, award of merit, and jurors special citation. And we encourage the jury, mission of this is to give out awards, to
Right.
recognize, there's no limit. And it becomes, sometimes the jury listens, sometimes there's just 1 year they didn't award anything in the commercial category. So, you know, we'll come back and sometimes the jurors say, well, that's not what I would have done. And we have to continuously explain to them, this is not about what you would have done, it's who's entered this and whether or not they deserve to win among all the other entrants.
Right, so every year, it's important to understand that we tell the jurors, this is the best of this year. We're not comparing it against 5 years ago or an iconic architect that is next door. This is the best of this year. And for each category, we do stress that we at least have the awards of excellence, awards of merit, and the juror citation. Now, I want to show one submittal that is a cautionary tale. This wasn't a winner, but it was very tough going to during the jury deliberations. So the issue is not the project they felt was an award winner, but it was the submittal, and I'll briefly go through. Now, again, this is the one, first of all, that's hard to load, so the PDF has to number crunch. Then the problem is, and if we can get to it here, is that we have these type of what we thought were photographs. Everyone thought they were photographs. So no one saw at the top design renderings. So these are photorealistic photos that were renderings that the design team had put in. And the jurors had been going through so fast on their short list that they visualized this. They said, oh, that's the interior of the project, move along, move along. Only when they were in the final deliberations of where should we put this, what category, they started realizing that half of these were photorealistic renderings. So I strongly urge you, when you're dealing with your project, do not show photorealistic renderings ever, because some of them aren't as good as this, and they begin to compare and contrast between the photorealistic rendering and your final photograph. And believe me, it goes downhill quickly when, if you didn't have an exact copy of your final product from your photorealistic rendering, they start, well, never mind, they didn't achieve their design. So it can really bite you. So as Manoj mentioned, having a sketch, a thumbnail, an idea, something that gave you the inspiration for that design, those are the perfect kind of renderings, because they get that. That's a napkin sketch that then turned into the project. But to do these type, it's very dangerous, and it's very confusing for everyone. So you can see how many of the design renderings were part of the submittal. Finally, you get to the photograph. And so, again, they don't have much time. They're thumbing through and they go, oh, this looks really good. They may not even make it to the final photographs because they're thumbing through so quickly, and they see the first two and they go, well, I think it's a short list, let's move on. Not realizing they were looking at the renderings. Anything else, Manoj, on this?
No, I just think that if it's going to be hard to load, most probably they're going to skip it.
Yeah.
They might, just because they're looking at 50 of these.
Yeah.
And if it's just taking too hard, they might just close it out, go to the next one. So then when we meet on that day, and the jurors make all the decisions. If it's not on their list, There are 4 of them sitting, and none of them have this project because it failed to load, it's gone. It just doesn't come up. There's just no way to deal with it.
And even if it is one of the finalists, it eats up our jury time because the computer, you saw the other ones, they load immediately. These may take forever. And while they're saying, oh, can you go to the back photograph? We're going to the back photograph and then waiting and waiting and waiting for it to load. So anyway, this was an award winner, but I just wanted, on the submittal side, I wanted to mention that as a cautionary tale. This was a beautiful project. And I will tell you, this is a project that's very minimalist as far as the submittal goes. As you can see, that is the first image on the submittal. There's no title, there's no nothing. This is just purely imagery. Very, very wonderful and very attractive. Here's the second image. We haven't even identified what the project is yet. And then we come up, and you can see these graphics are what take the time. This is, quote, a site plan, but they did it off of the old site plan. Then they begin to talk about the neighborhood and the history of music and rhythms and things like that. Very interesting. But again, they're just now getting into the project. The jurors were impressed with this. They were drawn to the next set of images by saying, what is this? And so when they saw the whole project, they were like, oh, we love this. The only thing I will say, the cautionary tale again, is it would have been nice just to have some kind of description of what we're looking at. I know it goes against the graphical nature of the, we just want the graphics to show what's going on. Again, they're thumbing through so fast that I think it would just be helpful. So between the graphics, the photography, and the minimal description, and just the sheer design factor of the project, this was enough for that submittal. That was it. And this won a top award.
For this jury.
Yeah.
You never know how
Exactly.
a jury is going to react. Some, another jury could have said, well, there's nothing in here. I didn't
Yeah.
really get the scope of it. But
And so
all
that's
the
why
jurors-
the cautionary tale is always add a little bit more than you think. So because there will be a jury or a juror is shortlisting and they go, oh, I just wasn't told enough about this project to proceed. And we've heard that. We said, okay, so all the others you didn't shortlist. I said, yeah, they did not give us enough information to proceed with. And even when we're shortlisting and we're going through the finalists and they scroll back through more in depth, they go, I just don't see enough here to inform me if this is an award winner.
And the other part of it, the other side of it is, then you see entries which clearly they might show a loading dock or the worst side of it, and then it's winning. All of a sudden, in the final stages, they look at it and they say, but that wasn't really handled that well. Or they so just try to get the best case out for yourself. You don't have to make it a very long submittal.
Any questions on this? So this is the Howard Hughes Medical Center. Now you see this is a different style. So immediately they're telling what the project is, as opposed to the last project where it was all about the imagery. They're giving you enough information as they come. This was the top award, so they had plenty of information to alert the jurors. Here was the descriptions. And then they started incorporating site plans and the floor plans immediately at the front to give you an idea, sections. And then they started going into the graphics. But as you can see, the reason I bring this up is they always have a label that tells you what you're looking at. So again, you can immediately get oriented to the project because most of these people don't know the DC area and or the area that happen to be the projects in the middle. But I thought this was a good graphic because they showed the individual units, axometric, and then the photographs, so they all tied it together. It was very clear what they were showing in the photography along with the plan, and then the outdoor imagery. So that was the gist of that submittal, but that was the top award winner. So they showed just enough. Obviously, you can show more, but the mix of photographs was just right in this scenario. Any thoughts, questions? Okay. This was a very wonderful project, and you'll see as we go through the submittal, they used the photography very well. It's very well labeled, and then they went into the spaces, and as you'll see, they also then had diagrammatics that discussed some of the public spaces, and then they'd have the photography to back that up. So it's very good. So first they went through the analysis graphically of showing how it applied to the campus master plan, some text descriptions, and then some graphics showing the different type of adjacencies and massing. And then they talk about how that they're creating interest on the master plan where everything comes together, and then showing that picture with an overhead so you can begin to see the pedestrian paths and all the other interactions between the different buildings. And in their case, they actually, using some of the space that's unused in the photography, they actually used that for some of their text. So it didn't feel like you had a photograph that was asymmetrical. It was actually part of the total. And of course, we all know this, but the dusk shots are always very intriguing. Everybody really likes to see these, and so they gravitate toward these because it begins to illuminate the interior and the exterior in one shot. And then by the same token, they have a daylight shot to see the reflection of the campus that you would see during the day. So they were able to show the different types of the building at each times of the day. This is the point that I begin to talk about. Now they begin to do diagrams and exploded diagrams to show how all the components go together. So you've got a taste of it in the photography that you saw initially. Now they begin to explain how each of the components show up in the project.
Notice the green roof. I just wanted to point out, we don't have a sustainability category. So the way to handle that is really, that's one of the challenges that you set for yourself. You can see that in the challenges and then demonstrate it. That was one of the criteria in how you met the challenge, so they know.
Yes, and since we don't have sustainability, the issue may be that they give a juror citation for a project for sustainable elements that they like. So the juror citation may be a specific element that they have focused in on. So don't shy away from calling out those components, and then it may shift it into a specialized category of the citation.
But if that's the goal, I would put some metrics there,
Yeah.
because there was an instance where it was sort of loosely referred to a sustainable agenda, but there was no way to really, the jury didn't file compelling evidence that it actually meant anything. There were references to it without any measure.
So then they begin to have some sections. It's very interesting. They come at the very end, but again, to explain what's going on. And then here they begin to discuss some of the componentry in the curtain wall that achieves some of the things. But again, this is not a focus on the sustainable. This is just a add to the building as well.
One thing that you should notice is the 250 word limit, clearly this entry hasn't followed that. But they've done it judiciously. There's enough, I think they're going to exceed 250 words. That's just guidance so that you don't get like a thesis written that no one's really.
Right, because they use their descriptions for the graphics, obviously if you're to do a strict count.
Right.
But I think it's actually better if you split it and supply it with the graphics rather than having all at the front, so then they can read immediately. Because we'll look at this just like we're looking at it now, and we'll look at this page. So if all of your text was at the very front, they go, can we scroll all the way back and read something like that? All right. Any questions? Okay. Unbuilts, again, are very interesting because they can either be photorealistic rendering like this, and they can be sketches. And the key to this is you're going to need a lot more diagrams, obviously, because you don't have the final photographs. So you'll see a lot more diagrams in these type of submittals. But they're very important, and they do, look at it, this wasn't a winner of the Unbuilt. So here's a graphic. This is Virginia, Southern Virginia, showing how this facility will support the rest of Virginia. Then they begin to show the blocking and stacking diagrams, adjacencies, and again, they're beginning to show their text with each of the graphics rather than having a description at the end. And we all know, we're familiar with this type when we're doing schematic design, concept design. But they did a really good job of organizing it so it could easily be seen immediately. So even if you didn't read it, you kind of got a sense of what was going on. And then they did some of these elevations, the striking shadows on the elevations. And then a sectional to give you a sense of all the componentry that would go into this unbuilt work. And then the photorealistic renderings. But in this case, this is all they've got. They don't have any photographs, so this is appropriate in this sense. So that gave you the sense of their unbuilt work. They didn't have to go into a huge amount of detail. Now we've seen some, for instance, there was an unbuilt work which was the submittal for the Olympics for the Washington, D.C. area. So they did go more into detail because they talked about each of the venues, but then they showed how all the venues tied together. So it was comprehensive, but it wasn't laborious. We've seen a couple of unbuilt works where there was a lot of material to absorb, and again, they're looking at a lot of these, so if it's too much, they're just going to glaze over and move on. So I would say this is a very nice clean version of an unbuilt project.
I have a question. Has there ever been a winner that did not utilize professional photography for the built work? Should we even consider submitting?
Not that I'm aware of in AIA. Now, we deal with the Fairfax County, we deal with ABC. I have seen non-professional photography, but it was good enough that it explained what was going on, and it sometimes made it, sometimes not. But I would say you really need to have the professional photography because that's what's going to stand out. The photography that's more just, I've documented this project is, since they're seeing so many, I know personally as an architect, I'd say, oh, look at that night shot of that building, and then I'm going to put that aside and move on. I didn't even read it, but I'm going to even do my own short list before I get to the short list I bring. So I would say that's probably a major factor. Yes?
So with the 250 word limit, it obviously sounds like it's more of a guideline than like a hard rule. Are all of them like that? They're just sort of guidelines? Because I know there's one that's show each facade, but some might not be, the best to show for award-winning projects. Is it similar with the words where if it doesn't exactly fit with what we want to submit, it's not necessary?
What happens in the jury session is they'll be scrolling through and they go, where's the other facade? They must be hiding something. So that comes up. So if you decide not to show something, because we all know there may be a back of the house, the danger is that if the jury starts analyzing it too much And then they go, well, this is funny, they're missing a couple facades, why is that? So then they start going through the scenarios, well, it must be because they didn't do a good job on the back or something like that. And that may not be the truth. So it probably behooves you to show what you think is best, even if it may be overkill, but explain it, with a tagline underneath the graphic saying, this is back of the house that's in an alley next to other existing back of the house buildings, something to that effect. Then at least you don't have them questioning, and we're not there to answer, oh, I've been by that building, it looks really good. We can't
We
do that.
might not even know the answers. We
Yeah.
just can't speak up. It's their decision. They have to make it.
Thank you all very much.
You submit more than one entry. There's lots of firms that submit multiple entries year
Yeah.
to year. That's what it takes.
And we've seen it not win one year and win the next year.
Yes, we've seen that.
The exact same submittal.
What do you think caused that?
Different jury, completely
Yeah,
different
it's
jury.
just the personality of the juries.
This is just different jury.
We try to go to a different part of the United States every year for a different jury so we don't get stated in one area. And you'll see different juries in different parts of the United States, maybe more welcoming, and maybe more eager, or maybe more, look, this just doesn't meet our standards.
That was the Minneapolis jury where we didn't get any awards because they just, that was the nature of the jury. So it may not be the city, it's just people we pick. And it's really hard to do it. It just could be just one person on the jury decides that we're going to just.
And so we've tried it in the past, we're not doing this anymore, but we did have kind of a lead jury system where the lead juror was there at both sessions and was there to comment on each. But we realized that this person tended to influence the other people because it was very strong, kind of boutique architect. And in the end, everybody was kind of, well, I like it, but what do you think? They're kind of waiting for this person to make a commentary.
Also getting other jurors, if you already pick a lead juror, then getting the other jurors becomes a problem in that scenario. So we've gone away from that. We don't know how to do that anymore. It's a really great process. It's just unpredictable. It's one of the things. It's just you can't really tell. And there's, we get all the time, we'll get calls, because there's so much time we all put in. And we know it's great, but it didn't win. And we'll get calls, well, what happened in the jury room? It's hard. We know they're the winners. They'll talk about that. And this is sort of a unique thing that we do. We have video snippets of their comments on the winning projects. If it didn't make the short list, it just doesn't have any discussion on it.